There's a cracking story in the Daily Telegraph, and you'll hear from the journalists involved in just a moment. And Madeleine Ross, the journalist, writes, pensioners face having to answer 243 questions correctly to keep their winter fuel allowance. Just think of that. AN1, and I'm not saying there are millions of pensioners who are far brighter than I am, far, far brighter. But there are some who don't necessarily respond well to form filling as a whole. To hit them with 240 questions, such as the Daily Telegraph points out, is your child in prison or custody pending trial or sentence? Do you want to speak to us in Welsh? Does your partner agree to you making this application? Is your partner in hospital as an inpatient? Oh, I just want to be able to turn up the gas. Yes, actually, yes, my daughter's just been arrested for curb crawling. Does that mean I don't get it? What is this all about? Well, of course, it's all about this £22 billion black hole. Remember Fully Costed, as one of you pointed out yesterday? And I'm ashamed to admit I can't remember your name. If you want to text me, by the way, I'll credit you, because it was such a good point that you made. Do you remember every time you spoke to a Labour politician during the general election campaign? It's fully costed. It's fully costed. How are you going to... It's fully costed. But how are you going to make... Yeah, it's fully costed. And yet now, this supposed £22 billion black hole, brackets, 9 billion of which is their decision to give those level of pay awards to doctors, to rail workers and to others, has to be addressed. Now, in Glasgow, Chancellor Rachel Reeves was asked whether the decision to scrap the winter fuel allowance for all but the poorest of pensioners was a mistake, whether she and the government are considering looking again at extending the benefits to more older people to avoid them potentially freezing to death in their homes this winter.
The truth is that these are not decisions that I wanted to make, but these are decisions we had to make, given the inheritance that we faced from the Conservative government. And there will be more difficult decisions to come in the budget later this year. That is the stark reality after the mess that the previous Conservative government have left this Labour government to inherit.
And a similar message from Energy Minister Miatta Fahnbulleh, who hosted a roundtable summit with the bosses of energy companies and the regulator Ofgem yesterday. Afterwards, the minister spoke with reporters to insist there is support in place for pensioners who need it, and the government has been left with no choice but to make major changes to the policy on the fuel allowance.
None of us came into government wanting to target the winter fuel payment. But in the end, we've got to respond to the world that we've inherited, not the world that we would have liked. And yes, the Chancellor has had to make a tough decision on this. My priority, and the priority of everyone round that table, is what we do this winter to support customers that are struggling with bills, customers that are vulnerable. And I feel confident that we have the beginnings of a package. There's a lot of work that we're doing, but there is absolutely commitment from the government, from everyone round the table, that will come to a measure that can support our most vulnerable customers this winter.
But we also heard yesterday from Caroline Flint, who served as a Labour MP for more than 20 years, and indeed as a minister in Gordon Brown's government, now chairing the Committee on Fuel Poverty. She told LBC she had questions about whether the government's controversial policy on the winter fuel allowance had been properly thought through.
It's worth thinking about when you make announcements, have you done some real looking at just who that might impact? And the danger is, governments come in, civil servants hand them a list of things that they could cut, and just sometimes they just maybe need to step back a bit and think about just how will that affect people. And I say that being very certain too that this is not a well-targeted benefit, and really it's something should have been done about it long before now to make sure it's better targeted.
Now let's bring Madeleine Ross into the conversation. She's the money reporter at the Telegraph who broke the story today and joins me now. Cracking story. Congratulations to you, Madeleine Ross. What sort of people will be trying to fill in this 243 questions, and what, if they're successful, does it entitle them to? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, anyone who's eligible for pension credit or another state benefit essentially is also going to still be eligible for the winter fuel payment, and that's people on really low weekly incomes. So it's going to be the most elderly, the most vulnerable who are still eligible for this, and the Labour government saying that means testing this and targeting it at them is the most sensible thing to do to save money while keeping people warm in their homes. But charities have said as many as 2 million people who are just above that limit will really struggle this winter, and that they're very worried. And as many as 2 million.
Now, in your article today, we talk about the fact that this was hoped to save £1.4 billion, but policy and practice has found some different sums, Madeleine.
Yes, they're saying that actually if the 880,000 pensioners who are eligible for pension credit but haven't been claiming it, the take-up rate is as low as 63%, turned round to the government and said, well, go on then, I'll have the top-up. it could actually cost an extra 3.8 billion, completely wiping out the savings that Rachel Reeves has said that it will make, which would be, a bit of a backward step,
Yes.
I would say.
You go through some of the figures. Single pensioners are eligible to receive pension credit. It's a weekly income of £218, is it? Is that right?
It is, yeah.
And for a couple?
It's slightly less. It's slightly less than double that, because they assume that the expenses for a couple will be slightly less than for a single person. So it's £332 a week.
Have you been able to speak to the Department of Work and Pensions? And if so, how do they seek to justify this, Madeleine?
Well, they say that the waiting times have not actually increased. Other charities have suggested that they have since the beginning of August, including the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. But they've said that they've put additional staff on the phones for people who want to call and make an application. You can apply online or by post as well. But charities are saying that their helplines are, not being flooded yet, but they're worried that they will be, with people who are confused by this form. It's complicated. I was looking through it yesterday, and I'm, I spend all day reading government forms. That's my job, and I was struggling a little bit to follow.
So you're a young financial journalist at the Daily Telegraph, and even you found it a bit daunting.
I did. I think it's just black text on the white paper and lots of boxes. You never know quite sure where to start.
In your piece, lastly, Madeleine, you quote people from the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, the Independent Age. I think you also speak with Age UK. Can you give my listeners finally an idea of the, can I say, concern, if not anger, at this policy, Madeleine?
I think people are really angry. I think it's one of the most hot button topics I've seen in my couple of years as a journalist. We've had so many emails in about this. Our readers are furious. They think, even if I don't need this myself, it's the most vulnerable who are going to suffer from this. And I mean, a couple of years ago, when things were really tough and energy bills were starting to shoot up, I mean, libraries launched warm spaces campaigns. I think we'll see that again this winter. And, really pushing to make community spaces safe places for people to be, and safe places for people to be warm, which is going to be crucial.
Read all about it in today's Telegraph. Madeleine Ross is the money reporter. Madeleine Ross, thanks for your time on that. If this affects you, let's go through those figures again. Single pensioners are eligible to receive pension credit, a weekly income of up to £218. Those in a couple, though, less than 332, which, as Madeleine said, is just a little under double, isn't it? 332 a week. So above that, you start to miss out on this? Good grief. Morgan Vine is Head of Policy and Influencing at Independent Age. How concerned? What are you picking up from, what are you and your colleagues picking up from people out there who might be affected by this? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. We've been getting lots of calls to our helpline with people incredibly worried about this, asking us if we can help them fill in a pension credit application there and then on the call. But we're also hearing from people who have applied themselves, who are just above the threshold, so they don't qualify, and they're telling us how important the winter fuel payment is to them and what it's going to mean for them to miss out.
What would your advice be to people listening now, Morgan?
I think the first thing is the form is complex, but there are lots of organisations out there who can support people to complete it, and also to find out everything that they might be entitled to, because there could be other financial entitlements that they're eligible for and not receiving. So places like the charity that I work for, Independent Age, we have a free helpline. We've got free information and advice online. So you can call us or look at our website, and we're there to support. The other thing that I would say is it's really important that we think the government should pause this until they are absolutely sure that everyone who relies on this money gets it. And one way of doing that is thinking about the form and which bits could be automated, which bits don't need to be asked. We think there's a lot that could be done in terms of data sharing and automation that could really help this situation.
Lastly, you mentioned the form. You'll be an expert and far closer to this than I am. Does it need to be this complex?
I think it could be less complex. When you look at some of the questions and some of the ones that you mentioned earlier, it is difficult to understand why some of them are in there. So I think there could definitely be a process of reviewing the form. But for a lot of the people that we support, they can get through the form, potentially with support or independently. It's more that they then don't sometimes get access to extra things. So you can qualify for pension credit and you're then meant to get all these other things. But sometimes you have to do further applications to get the additional things. So it would be good if all of that was streamlined.
Grateful for your time, Morgan Vine. Thank you. You're Head of Policy and Influencing at Independent Age. And now over to you. Those figures again. Isn't this shameful? Isn't this shameful? Pensioner receiving more than £218 a week, or a couple more than 332. They're going to have the money taken. How outrageous. And the questions. Is your partner in hospital as an inpatient? What is the name of your council? What is the coefficient of linear expansion, and how would you increase to the Middle East? All right, I made a couple of those up, but two actually. The complexity is obviously there. We'll take your calls on that if it affects you, or indeed your mum, your dad, your grandparents.